In that life, father and son, every one of them turned out behead, just about. I discourage all young people from getting involved in any type of street life, any type of gang life. It's a dead-end street. Don't do it. Stay away from it. It's a bad lifestyle. This is not the way to go. You gotta go legit. Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well, all is good and very blessed on this end. And as always, we give God all the praise, honor, and glory for that. And what am I going to do today? Very interesting. You know, I read a lot and things come into my feed because we're into all the mob stuff, as you know. I got something that I thought was interesting. It was the 10 most notorious father-son mob combinations. In other words, the father was in the life, the son followed him into that life. I told you there's a lot of nepotism in Cosa Nostra and Mafia, both in Italy and here in America. Makes sense. Why? You bring in people that you trust. Father and son, cousins, nephews, you know, it happens all the time. You know, a lot of people say, oh, Michael, you know, you got in there because of your father. Well, my father proposed me, like so many other fathers propose their sons. And today we're going to talk about 10 of them, and they're in kind of an order from 10 down to 1. Now, as the most notorious. Now, I want to make this clear. I don't necessarily agree with this. I am just repeating what it said in the article. We'll talk about it. It's mob stuff. It's interesting, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, number 10 on the list was Gerard Pappa and his son, John Pappa. And Gerard grew up in Bensonhurst. He was actually part of the same street gang that Sammy Gravano was part of, the Rampers, I think they call them. As a matter of fact, Sammy and him were friends for quite a while. And he was a pretty tough kid from what I understood. He got made with the Genoveses in the 1970s, and he was into a lot of stuff. Some said he was into drugs. I think he got busted for that once or twice. I don't know. Sammy and him, I think, had a falling out. Don't quote me. Sammy probably talked about him, might have talked about him in one of his videos. Wasn't a guy of a lot of significance, but he was a guy, and his son followed him into the life, so they have him as number 10. He ended up getting killed at some point in time. I think he killed a Colombo guy. He killed Tommy Spiro, if I'm not mistaken, and then he was taken out by Dominic Cataldo, allegedly. That's what they said. Dominic was a good friend of mine. He and I were on trial together in the Giuliani case, but allegedly Dominic Cataldo took him out. Dominic has passed on now. We can talk about it. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't talk about that kind of stuff out of school. But anyway, he ended up getting killed. I think it was killed in a restaurant in the 80s. And then his son, John Pappa, became a member of that life in the Colombos. I seem to remember him a little bit, didn't know him well. I don't think there was anything of substance with him, you know, not such a great story. But anyhow, they were listed as number 10. Gerard Pappa, his son John Pappa. Next, number 9. Again, I don't necessarily agree with this, was Carmine Persico and his son Ali Boy. You know Carmine, my boss of the Colombos for many years. You know the situation. He died back in 2019. Did a video about him. You're all familiar with him. We spoke about it many times. His son Ali Boy was my gumbada. He baptized my son John. And so we were pretty tight at one point in time. He ended up, you know, again, following his father. We got made around the same time, and he's about my age. I think he might be a year younger than me. But anyhow, sadly enough, he was, you know, convicted of the murder of Billy Catolo, Wild Bill, and sentenced to life in prison, and he's been in prison for many, many years, so it's a sad story. But anyhow, they were listed as number 9 in this list, going from top to bottom. Next was Raymond Patriarca and his son, Raymond Patriarca Jr. Raymond Patriarca was a powerful guy. Out of Rhode Island. He ran, you know, all of New England for really about 30 years. He had a reputation. He was kind of a brutal guy from what, you know, the talk on the street. And he was into a lot of things. I think anybody in the New England area, anything that you were doing illegitimate, you had to pay Raymond tax on it or whatever. He was a tough guy, tough businessman. Again, he had a pretty rough reputation. As a matter of fact, one time, supposedly he ordered one of his guys to kill the guy's son. He wanted him to kill his own son because of a bad business deal. You know, another time I think he put a contract or a hit out on his brother because his brother didn't recognize that there was surveillance equipment in one of the offices. One of the offices were bugged. So he had kind of a rough reputation, but he did run the family for 30 years. Then he passed on, and when he passed on, his son, Raymond Patriarca Jr., took over, and he was known as kind of a weak leader. He wasn't his dad, didn't really follow in his dad's footsteps. I think his underboss tried to take control of the family while he was in prison, and the family kind of fell apart under his rule. He came out, and things kind of fell apart. I don't know really what happened after that, but the family was never the same up there after Raymond Sr. was gone. All right, then we got Carlo Gambino. We all know that, boss of the Gambino family. Capo di tutti capo, they're known as boss of all bosses. We know all about him, ran that family for 20 years. 50 years in their life, probably did 22 months in prison, died in his home. He did it right. You know, we know the story of Carlo. His son, Tommy Gambino, you know, it was interesting. His son went to college and then got out of college, graduated college, and he got made in 1962. Brilliant guy. I did meet Tommy a couple of times. He was in the Garment Center. After Paul Castellano was taken out by Gotti, Tommy still remained in the family because he was a big earner. He did do some time in prison, and I think he's still around. I'm not sure how old he is, but you know, he was a well-respected guy and a very good earner, Carlo Gambino's son. Then you got Frank James Calabrese and Frank Calabrese Jr. They were from the Chicago family, the outfit they called it. Frank Calabrese had a bad reputation, you know, as a street guy. I think he was convicted of 7 murders, one of them being Tony Spilotro. You know Spilotro? You know, you saw it in the movie Casino. He was convicted of that, and he ended up going to jail. He got convicted on a major case. And then his son and him were in prison at the same time, Frank Calabrese Jr. And his son had a big falling out with his dad over something, contacted the FBI while he was in prison and agreed to testify against his father and a couple of other people. Actually put his father away for life and a couple of other guys. And he got out of prison. I think he's doing some motivational speaking right now. As a matter of fact, if I remember, he reached out to me. He wants me to have a sit down with him. I might. I think my team is looking into that. I don't know him. I only know the story. And they were number 6 on this list. So Frank Calabrese Jr. Maybe I'll have a sit down with Jr. later on, and we'll see. Might be interesting. Then we got Frank Locascio and Salvatore Locascio as number 5 on this list, going from 10 down. Frank Locascio, you know who he was. He was the consigliere of Gotti's crew at that time. He was Gotti's consigliere, and he was convicted on the case involving Sammy Gravano. Did life in prison. He actually died in prison, I think, last October. It's about a year ago that he died. And then his son got made in that life also, and his son was indicted on a huge scheme. It was an internet fraud scheme or something to do with the adult content. I don't know. Ended up getting convicted. I think his whole crew got convicted, and he ended up getting 2 years in prison and probably out now and doing okay. Again, I didn't follow that, but they were number 5. Frank Locascio and Salvatore Locascio, father and son. Now number 4, we got Greg Scarpa and Greg Scarpa Jr., 2 guys that I was very, very familiar with. Greg Scarpa Sr., you know the story, you know his whole background. I'm sure we've gone over that and you've heard it a million times. He was an informant. He ended up dying of AIDS, you know, after a while. Anyway, he was working with the government for over 20 years. When we heard that in our crew, we were pretty nervous about it. I was. I sat down with him many times. We were both you know, captains in that crew. Greg Scarpa Jr., he got made around the same time that I did, kind of followed in his father's footsteps. I know when he went to prison, he got a huge prison sentence. While he was in there, he contacted the FBI and said he had some information about the World Trade Center bombings, that he was there with the guy that was allegedly, you know, convicted of that, I think, or was involved at some point in time. Turned out to be a scam. He wasn't really cooperating. He did get out of prison, Scarpa Jr., just a couple of years back. Compassionate release. He's very, very sick. He's got some health issues. I was in contact with him briefly and knew him fairly well. So father and son, Greg Scarpa Sr., Greg Scarpa Jr., they were number 4, Colombo family guys. Move on. Number 3, something you're very familiar with, Sonny Franzese and Michael Franzese. Do I need to go into that? I don't think so. You know, my dad and me, for some reason they have us as number 3, as one of the most notorious, as number 3 on this notorious list. I'm not going to get into that. You decide. I know a lot of people are going to say, come on, Michael, you guys weren't as notorious. Maybe your father was, but you weren't. You were more of a racketeer than a gangster, and on and on and on. We don't have to get into that. You know both of our stories. So I was number 3 with my dad. Number 2, Nicodemo Scarfo and Nicky Scarfo Jr. You know the story, Nicodemo. You know, I knew him fairly well. He and I were going to unionize the security guards in Atlantic City. I got along very well with Nicky Scarfa. He was the boss of the Philadelphia family for a while, had a reputation that, you know, he ended up getting a 55-year prison sentence and ended up dying in prison at some point in time. His son, Nicky Scarfa Jr., you know, kind of followed in his footsteps. There was an assassination attempt on him. He got shot several times. The story was that Joey Molino did that. I'm only saying that's what the story was. I don't know if there's any truth to that or not. And what happened, he ended up getting, his father was very upset about that, Nicky Sr., and he ended up getting his son made with the Lucchese's to kind of protect him, kind of get him away from the Philadelphia family, and had him made with the Lucchese's. And I think he ended up back in prison, Nicky Scarfa Jr., so. You know, these are all end up bad. They're all sad stories. Number one most notorious father and son duo were Philly Testa and Salvatore Testa. Philip Testa, the father, he took over the Philly crew after Angelo Bruno was murdered. And it was short-lived for him. I think it lasted a year. He got indicted on some major case. He was a pretty brutal guy, too. That was his reputation anyway. And he was murdered. There was a bomb put under his porch at his house. Blew up, rather, and he was gone. So he was murdered, I think, in '81. He had a very short run as the boss. Yeah, Salvatore took over, and Nicky Scarfa was the boss at that. And then he made Sal a captain in that crew. And then Sal wanted to avenge his father's death. He went after all the guys that murdered him. He eventually killed them all. And then Nicky Scarfa got a little bit concerned about him for some reason, I don't know. And Nicky ended up supposedly ordering his murder. So father and son were both murdered in a pretty brutal way. And you know what? I'm telling you, now that I look back, obviously, and I understand the life, I would never bring my son into something like this. Never. Because the outcome is always bad. The end result is always bad. You know, people, I tell these stories because you want to hear them. I know that that's part of my following, although a lot of people want to hear about other things that I have to talk about the transformation in my life. You know, when we do a Q&A after every one of my speaking events, most of the questions about how did you get out of the life? How did your family handle it when you were in prison? How did you transform yourself? Michael, how did you forgive yourself for things that you've done in the past? You know, a lot of stuff like that. How did you make this transition? It's so hard to, you know, change your mentality. I get a lot of those questions, and honestly, that's what I love to talk about. And when I mentor people, it's all about that. It's all about transforming their life, getting in a better place, coming from a bad situation to a good one, because I've been able to do that. Very fortunate, very blessed. I give God all the credit for that. My family, my wife, my kids kept me straight, and the people that care about me. But, you know, we tell the mob stories because I know you want to hear them, and I got, you know, a lot of you that follow me, that's what you're interested in. But in that life, father and son, every one of them turned out bad, just about. Except for maybe Tommy Gambino. His father, like I said, did it right. He made him graduate college, and then he brings him into the life. And he only did a couple of years, and he's probably doing well right now. Very successful and smart business guy, like a lot of other guys in that life. So I discourage all young people from getting involved in any type of street life, any type of gang life. It's a dead-end street. Don't do it. Stay away from it. The mob life, don't glorify it in any way. It's a bad lifestyle. And again, I tell everybody that I speak to all the time, this is not the way to go. You got to go legit. As tough as it is, you got to go legit. That's where the money is. That's where the peace of mind is. That's where all your success comes from when you do it legitimately. So, hope you enjoyed it. Yes, we were number 3. I don't necessarily agree with this list. There are a lot of father and son combos that could have been on it that weren't on it. And that's that. You know, this is other people's opinions. I'm just repeating them, giving you my perspective. That's it for today. How do I always leave you? Please subscribe. We're on a march for 1 million. Help me out here. We're getting close. You know, less than 2 years, just about 2 years, I should say. And that's a pretty monumental feat. You don't rise that fast, but it's because of all of you. We are doing a big giveaway. Pay attention. We're going to be announcing it soon. How do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. Please be safe. Be healthy, do the right thing for your body and your mind. I sincerely mean this. God bless every one of you. And yep, I'll see you next time. Take care.